Some 150,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines made by China have been inoculated overseas, and no serious side effects have been reported. That's according to China's National Health Commission, or NHC. However, the dark cloud of vaccine diplomacy looms over China's efforts to make its COVID-19 vaccines a global public good. What do we know about Chinese vaccines so far? How safe are they? Joining me from Beijing, Professor Zhang Linqi of Tsinghua University, whose laboratory is involved in COVID-19 vaccine research, and via Skype from Nanjing in South China's Jiangsu province, Professor Zhiwei from the Center for Public Health Research of the Medical School of Nanjing University. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Professor Zhang, let me start with you. Your lab has been dedicated to vaccine research. In March, you reported to President Xi Jinping on behalf of your lab. Could you tell us more about your research and how it is used in vaccine development?
Yes, my laboratory has been focused on the immune responses against a viral infection, in particular against HIV. So when the corona outbreak happened, so we immediately shift our laboratory efforts into studying the antibody responses against COVID-19. So as you know, the antibody is a major part of our immune system, providing a very important role in protecting us from infection, also from developing diseases. So using the sophisticated technology, we are able to isolate the antibodies from the COVID-19 infected individuals and show many of them are able to inhibit viral infection in vitro. Now those antibodies have already manufactured and being tested in the clinical trials, and hopefully will be able to use as antibody drugs to treat infected patients.
China initiated the emergency use of COVID-19 vaccines in the country in July. About 1 million doses have already been inoculated for people with high exposure risks on the premise of voluntary and informed consent. China says that among these people, around 60,000 have gone to regions considered high risk, and no serious infection cases emerged from there. So, Professor Wu, what do you think has been the scientific criteria for the emergency use, as a lot of people have been, just not know upon what statistics have China made that decision?
I think there are two major criteria for that. One is the safety. This is one of the most important criteria for using the vaccine. The other criteria actually is the effectiveness of the vaccine. What we know, for those vaccines are actually basically based on the clinical phase 2 clinical trial and also laboratory data, basically showing that those vaccines are working against the virus. So that actually is the basic criteria for using the vaccine in those population who are actually at high risk for exposure.
Professor Zhang, you reported to President Xi in March, and actually in July, just 4 months later, the trial already started. Do you think the vaccine was safe enough then? How do you look at the emergency use and the results that has been obtained so far? Of course, we do not know the exact efficacy number, but it seems that the safety rate is pretty high.
Yes. Based on the State Council information press release that we learned, among those vaccinated by the Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines, the safety profile is actually fairly good. And as you said, that we are waiting for the efficacy phase 3 trial results released. Since the China situation getting much better, and then no sufficient number of new cases occurred, so the phase 3 trial have to be conducted outside China. Given the complexity in the clinical trials and regulatory monitoring for each particular countries, it is expected to take longer for the result to be released. So hopefully we'll hear from them soon.
The UAE has just announced that it's rolling out Chinese-made vaccines to all its residents after phase 3 trials concluded in the country. Most recently, the vaccine was tested on 31,000 volunteers and has an efficacy rate of 86%. However, as the Chinese vaccine has passed the 50% threshold for efficacy in late-stage trials in Brazil, the Brazilian health regulator has questioned China's approach, or asked a question. They say the Chinese criteria for granting emergency use authorization are not transparent. There is no available information about the criteria currently in use by Chinese authorities to make these decisions. Professor Wu, are the concerns over transparency legitimate? How should we understand this?
Well, actually, I think, transparency is very important for using the vaccine, because for the users, it is very critical for them to understand what they actually are based on when you are using the vaccine, and when it is approved for human use, particularly for large-scale use. So I think, but in this particular case, I don't really know exactly what the Brazilian side is criticizing about the transparency issues, because one of the research institute was one of the major participants or carrying this clinical trial. I guess they would have all the data available to them. So for the emergency use, I do believe that we do have an internal mechanism to approve for the most needed population to use the vaccine. So basically, I think more likely this is communication issues, and maybe that there is a certain kind of understanding issues between Brazilian side and the Chinese side. I guess this is something actually, if it is existing, then they need to resolve.
Let's talk a little bit about the new variant that everybody is talking about. The new variant or mutation to the coronavirus was reported in the UK. It begs the question whether the vaccines will still work. Now, Pfizer and Moderna, two major COVID vaccine manufacturers, are now testing their vaccines against the new variant. What about Chinese vaccines, Professor Zhang? Do they still work against the new strain?
This is absolutely a great question. The viral evolution, viral evolve and viral mutate happens all the time. We don't have a solid data to evaluate whether these mutations will have a drastic impact on disease, causing disease. And then what we want to monitor and also study to see whether this virus or mutated virus are still susceptible or sensitive to the immune responses we induce by all kinds of vaccines. In fact, our laboratories are generating those mutations and evaluating their sensitivity. So only by then we'll be able to tell whether the current vaccines or antibody drugs are able to contain or inhibit these mutated viruses. So we still need a little time to better understand the consequence of the mutation.
Professor Wu, your understanding? I've seen some reports which says the current vaccine actually can work, but of course, different people might have different opinions.
Well, actually, I do believe that current vaccine should be fine, because if you think of how the vaccine works, when we are using those immunogens to generate antibodies, you have a bunch of antibodies against various different sites. And so far, the British variant identified actually only one side, which is within the so-called IBD, the binding side for the receptors. So if that binding side actually is mutated, then there are other sides as well. So I don't think right now, we need to be particularly concerned about this single mutations. As Linqi just mentioned, that this is something actually only can be verified and demonstrated in the lab studies and in the subsequent observations. We have to be patient.
Yes. Well, another piece of information that caught a lot of people's attention is that Shanghai Fosun Pharmaceutical Group on Wednesday said it will buy at least 100 million doses of a vaccine from Germany's BioNTech for use in Chinese mainland next year if the vaccine receives approval. The move, it says, makes BioNTech's vaccine the prime international competitor to China's leading developers in their home market. Professor Zhang, how do you interpret the move of Fosun Fosun Group. Some people are saying if China has already produced so many vaccines, why are they still going out and buying international brands, given that there is such a lack of it?
We are still in a great need of vaccines. Not, we are importing them. We are importing. In fact, we would love to import more vaccines, since we need more, given the population size of China. So I don't see there is a lack of confidence or competition with our homemade vaccines. So the major problem we are facing is a lack of sufficient number of doses of vaccines, not because of our lack of confidence in our homemade.
Then that begs, people will be asking that question. Professor Wu, let me get this from you. If there is a need for vaccine, why is China so actively helping other countries by providing vaccines for them at a relatively low price and pledging to make it a global public good?
Well, actually, China joined the WHO's COVAX program, which actually requires a commitment. Basically, that's the whole point. When a country joins the COVAX, you need to give a certain amount of your vaccine into that program, so the vaccine could be distributed to needy countries. I mean, that's all the so-called international commitment and for the global good. But for Fosun's case, I think it's more like a commercial move, because Fosun invested in the early stage in BioNTech development. I think for anybody who actually invests money, they have to to recover the cost. I think this is something more like a kind of a commercial activity. It's nothing to do with vaccine computation. The other thing is that 50 million vaccines. It's only you could only cover about 3 to 4% of the population in China. So this is not a major percentage of vaccine put into the use. Right. So I think this is it's highly understandable. You diversify various different vaccines to make a broader coverage.
Mm-hmm. Well, 100 million doses, of course, they're buying, but given that everybody needs to. Finally, very briefly, Professor Zhang, where next? I mean, where next are you going? You were talking about some things coming up. When do we have some sure data about the effectiveness of vaccine in your lab? Very briefly, please.
Our vaccine will be manufactured and tested starting in human early next year. So hopefully by the middle of next year, we'll have a very solid data showing the safety and efficacy profile. We are very looking forward to it.
Okay. Thank you so much. All the very best luck to all the researchers and everybody involved in helping us fight this pandemic. We appreciate it. Professor Zhang Linqi of Tsinghua University and Professor Zhiwei from Nanjing University.